Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webcast, IMS Data Migration Made Easy. Our presenters for today's event are Bill Bostridge, Director of Business Development, and Stan Hoey, Migration Products Manager. Bill and Stan have recently joined SyncSort through the acquisition of the UK-based Circle Group. Before we begin, I'd like to review some quick housekeeping items. The presentation is scheduled to last approximately 45 minutes and will be followed by a live Q&A session. You can submit your questions at any time using the Ask a Question box on the left side of your player. Please also use this feature to request any technical assistance you might need, and we'll get back to you immediately. Also, you can download a copy of today's slides in the Event Resources tab in the lower left corner of your screen. So without further ado, I will turn the event over to Bill so we can get started. Bill?
Thanks, Jennifer. Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to today's webinar. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules to listen in on the presentation entitled IMS Data Migration Made Easy, Migrating from IMS to DB2 without rewriting your applications. My name is Bill Bostridge. I'm the Business Development Director for our Transparent Data Migration Tools, and I'm joined by Stan Hoey, who is our Data Migration Tools Product Manager. My background is over 30 years in IT, of which the last 20 years have been in the US, initially managing a couple of UK software startups, but for the last 10 years working for Circle Computer Group in the IMS to DB2 migration space. You'll no doubt have picked up in the recent press articles and the recent communications that we provided to you for this webinar that Circle is now part of SyncSort. Stan and I are delighted, along with the rest of the Circle team, to be part of the SyncSort organization, and we're looking forward to introducing SyncSort's extensive mainframe customer base to our low-risk, high ROI transparent data migration tools. Prior to Stan joining Circle back in 1995, he spent over 20 years with IBM and has been involved in transparent data migration projects all over the world. Stan's going to present the technical aspects of today's presentation, and I'll let him provide a little more detail on his background once I hand over to him. So, today's presentation is aimed at providing an introductory overview of the DL2 technology, an understanding of how DL2 can provide a rapid return on investment, assist you in streamlining current database management resources, and also helping you to protect the investment that you currently have in your legacy applications. Now, the unique characteristic of DL2 is that you can realize all of these benefits with no changes to your existing IMS application code. You'll hear Stan and I say no changes to your code a number of times because it's a key fundamental part of our transparency solutions. So what we're talking about is a transparent data migration of your IMS databases to DB2 where there are no changes to the application code and you continue to work with those applications as you do today. Okay, so on to today's agenda. What we're going to do, I'm going to just give you a brief overview of the SyncSort and Circle acquisition. Then we'll talk a little bit more about what is a transparent data migration and what are the benefits to you and your respective organizations. We'll then discuss transparent data migration as part of a legacy modernization program. And then I will turn proceedings over to Stan, and he will talk us through an overview of the DL2 technology. Stan will then hand back to me, and we'll walk through some case studies explaining how some of our customers have utilized DL2 to great effect to eliminate licensing costs for IMSDB and their third-party tools, and in many cases open up the data to support modernization initiatives within those organizations. We'll then wrap it up with some potential next steps, and hopefully that will assist you to take a closer look at the technology and see how it might fit into your own unique modernization or cost reduction plans. So, moving on to our next slide. As you know, the big news for us was that on September 30th, we were acquired by SyncSort, so Circle became part of the SyncSort family. So what does that mean? Well, over the years, our technology has been proven in mainframe shops across the globe, but now the Circle migration tools are backed by the support and deep resources of the most trusted third-party mainframe software company, that being SyncSort. Everyone within the Circle organization is thrilled to be part of such a well-respected and certainly highly technical company. Their superior products on nearly 50% of mainframe sites around the world, and this opens up just a whole new opportunity for the Circle transparent data migration tools. So as I said, we're delighted to be part of the SyncSort organization. So just looking at SyncSort, many of you will know SyncSort. Many of you are customers of SyncSort already. But as I said, we're delighted to be part of SyncSort, and over the last 40 years, they've become the most trusted third-party software provider for mainframes. SyncSort customers are companies who deal with some of the largest and most sophisticated data volumes. That's the reason they come to SyncSort. SyncSort tools solve data problems that no one else can. And now with the acquisition of Circle, SyncSort can now offer additional solutions around legacy migration for both IMS DB and vSAN to DB2, and in turn potentially move legacy data into Hadoop ETL, where SyncSort is providing first-to-market fully integrated solutions. Here's a sample of a number of DL2 customers. As you can see, that we cover many different areas in terms of the organizations that we provided to, both here in the US and of course in Europe. I'm going to highlight some of those companies in the case studies that we'll review after Stan's taken us through the technical overview. But as I said, we've been around for quite some time, and the partnership with SyncSort now really marries up two software companies with some deep technical knowledge and resources. Okay, so what do we mean by transparent data migration? Circle's been developing mainframe software since the 80s, and transparent data migration software since the mid-90s, where we really said we would concentrate specifically in that area. We've had clients using DL2 in production since 1995. And we recently released version 4.2, and that continues our focus on adding more automated migration functionality to really reduce the project timeline and the costs for a migration project. As you're probably aware, IMS has not really changed much in the last 30 years, so really what we've been trying to do is to make sure that DL2 is as streamlined and effective as possible in delivering these mainframe IMS to DB2 migration projects. So a key aspect of the architecture of the Circle Transparency products is that the underlying application programs are unchanged. And as I said, that's a fundamental principle. DL2 is just dealing at the database level only. Your application programs don't require to be compiled or recompiled. So, in terms of that, we are just at that database layer. DL2 is a suite of migration tools that provides the ability to map and migrate IMS segments to DB2 tables, and then once that process is completed, DL2 manages the process of directing calls from your IMS applications to the data that now resides in DB2. And when data is returned via DL2, it's presented back to the application as if it had come from its original IMS database store. We replace the IMS stub program with our own DL2 version, and DL2 takes over the entire process of managing the calls and directing those calls to DB2. Your applications continue to run, and they're oblivious to the fact that the data is now stored in DB2. Stan's going to provide a much more detailed overview of that, but that's really where our solution differentiates itself. Now, in addition to that, different DB2 design models can be deployed, and you can deploy different DB2 models for different databases or even segments within a database. Again, I'll let Stan get into the real detail of how we do that. But it really comes down to what's driving the need to move from IMS to DB2. Clearly, if it's cost containment or rationalization of platforms due to a skills shortage, then a simple DB2 design at what we call the character level, or option 1, is probably all that's required. And that becomes a pretty simplistic migration. We're moving IMS segments to DB2 tables, but just in their current character form. However, if you have a business requirement to move to DB2 to further the life of your applications in a SQL environment, in that case, a more complex DB2 design may be required. Either way, DL2 can help in a very flexible and low-risk methodology. An added bonus with DL2 that if your plans change in the future, you can deploy a different DB2 design at any time, even after IMS-DB has been removed from your environment. So you might take a view that you want to make the move from IMS to DB2 as quickly as possible, using just moving from one design to another in a character form, but later on actually then come up with a better DB2 design. You can actually do that even though IMS-DB has actually been removed from your environment. Now, once the migration project is completed and you've moved all your IMS databases into your production environment, IMS-DB can be eliminated, and that's where we deliver significant reduction in your software costs, plus any third-party tools that you might have, as you'll be able to actually move those completely out of your environment. So in short, DL2 offers the lowest risk, lowest cost strategy to migrate from IMS to DB2 without changing application code, and we've got many happy customers who are fully prepared to testify to that fact. Okay, the enterprise modernization agenda, as you can see from this chart, the spend remains significant. As you can see here, we've got a very large proportion of spend in infrastructure and application modernization. I'm sure if you're experiencing in your own organization, the pressure's on right now with IT to help support business to deliver new revenue streams, be more agile and optimize business operations. So that's where a lot of this cost is actually coming from organizations. The mainframe is at the core of legacy modernization. ZOS remains the preferred database platform, and DB2 for ZOS is the preferred DBMS for most applications. However, IMS continues to play a crucial role in legacy systems, but one of the issues is that IMS programming and DBA skills are becoming scarce, and that's posing an even greater risk to the enterprise right now. I'm sure the skills drain is a challenge many of you will recognize in your own organizations, and we've noted really over the last 2 or 3 years that that's becoming a bigger problem. Okay, so there are also, other alternatives. Whilst we and many of our satisfied clients agree that DL2 is the best IMS-DB to DB2 migration technology, there's alternative enterprise modernization strategies available to you. Clearly, if legacy modernization is the objective, then rewriting your applications may be the optimum solution. But I'm sure, as you'll recognize, that cost can be significantly higher, and project timetables, as we all know, are just notoriously unreliable. We had a client that we worked with about 4 years ago, and they completed their entire IMS DB to DB2 migration with DL2 in a little under 12 months. They actually put together an internal report and had estimated that to rewrite their entire core applications was going to take in excess of 68 man-years. That's a big rewrite project and obviously full of risk. So we were able to actually get that done for them in under 12 months, and they're a very, very happy customer. Another opportunity is data replication or propagation. And whilst that opens up data to new uses and users, the downside is that you've got data existing in 2 different formats, and that quite often presents synchronization challenges. Propagation is not going to help you meet the challenges of diminishing IMS skills in your own environment, and increases your ongoing software and related support costs rather than reducing them. Another option is ERP solutions, as are off-the-shelf packages. And whilst the solutions can appear to offer cost reductions, and that might gain the attention of your CFO, they're often more expensive in the long run, and they don't often replace the rich functionality that you have inherent in those legacy applications. So that's a big challenge, which is trying to replace an existing system with a packaged application. So what happens? Well, many companies decide to do nothing, or as we like to say, kick the can down the road. This would clearly be the easiest option if there was a long line of aspiring IMS DBAs and COBOL programmers. But there's now ongoing pressure to reduce, no ongoing pressure to reduce mainframe budgets. So we're seeing, a shift where reduction in cost is still high on the agenda, but the risk associated with people going off to retirement and the people that support those systems becoming a bigger challenge. Okay, so transparent migration is what we do. We have two distinct products. DL2 is clearly the product that we're going to be talking about today. But we also have a vSAM to DB2 migration tool as well. And that product is resold via IBM as KICS vSAM Transparency for Xeros. They've completed many big migration projects with that product. We tend to concentrate very much on the DL2 side and let IBM actually work on the vSAM side of things. But between us, we've concluded projects with financial and insurance services, state and local governments, manufacturing, retail and distribution. So we cover pretty much all the bases. Anybody that has IMS is a potential candidate for a DL2 migration. Okay, at this point, I'd like to hand over to Stan. He's going to talk us through the technical overview of the product, and then I'll pick back up and we can talk through some of the user stories of people that have utilized DL2. So over to Stan. Thanks.
Hi, sorry folks, I was on mute. I've heard Bill do this presentation before and it often sends me to sleep, so I went on mute so you didn't hear my snoring. So my accent's a little bit different to Bill's, despite the fact that Bill has a very clear English accent. He's lived and worked out of Boston for many years. I'm babysitting the UK in his absence. I've been practicing this accent for a long time, so this is as good as it gets. My background is entirely technical, mostly database, but unashamedly mainframe. I began computing in the 70s working with IMS, and I moved into DB2 as far back as, I think, version 1.2, 1.3 in the 80s, specializing largely in the system side, database administration, backup recovery, disaster recovery, performance, and so on and so forth. When I left IBM to join Circle, I started working with Circle and the transparency products and really have been there ever since. And I reiterate what Bill says about our recent arrangements with ThinkSort. I'm very excited because I know ThinkSort have a lot of very, very clever people, and I'm looking forward to developing working relationships with them all in the future. So I'm going to be focusing on one of the two migration products, this time DL2. DL2 is our IMS transparency product. And this slide gives a very simple illustration of how an IMS program works today. So to access IMS databases, an application program uses what is referred to as an IMS stub module. And traditionally, the stub is statically linked with the application program, but more and more today, it is invoked dynamically, called at runtime, and it's not part of the application program itself. So IMS database calls in the application program invoke the IMS stub either implicitly or explicitly, and that provides the interface to IMS databases. And this happens in a CICS or IMS online program or a BMP indirectly, or in the case of DLI batch and DBB batch, it's a direct communication with the databases themselves. After the application program passes the call, IMS processes it, and the results are returned to the application program with a bunch of status information, and that status information drives the application logic. The same stub is used by IMS online programs and batch programs. CICS always has to be different, so it has its own stub, which is language dependent. The IMS stub also provides an interface to DB2 in order to support two-phase commit protocols for those programs accessing both IMS and DB2 databases. So why is that relevant to DL2? Well, DL2 has an equivalent to the IMS stub. Initially, there's a DL2 batch utility that scans your application program load libraries, identifying all those programs that have the IMS stub statically linked, and invoking the MVS binder to create a new version of the load module that contains the DL2 stub instead of the IMS stub. This application, this program load module is in a state that we would call DL2 ready. For those applications that invoke IMS through the stub dynamically, then the stub is loaded at runtime. And to make DL2 able to participate in that environment, it's a simple issue of having the DL2 system library ahead of IMS's DSF Resol and StepLib JobLib. And those either statically linking the stub or by having DL2 ahead of IMS in the StepLib makes the program DL2 ready. So what does the stub do? Well, when you make a call to IMS, in effect, that call is translated into a bunch of parameters identifying various things, including the PCB within the PSB that the IMS program is using. And the PSB, and PCB rather, and obviously SSAs complete the parameter list on the call. The IMS database name is part of this PSB control block. And when DL2 intercepts an IMS call, it establishes which database is the target of that call. If that database is still an IMS database, in other words, DL hasn't been migrated to DB2, then DL2 passes the call to IMS and it's performed exactly as it is today. If, however, the call is for a database that's been migrated to DB2 under DL2's control, then DL2 undertakes the processing of that call against the data in DB2. DL2 processes in DB2 calls that are equivalent to IMS calls. So a GET call will result in a select. An insert call in IMS will result in an insert. And the calls that DL2 makes are embedded in a driver program. This driver program is generated from the specification in the IMS PSB. We refer to this as an SQL driver program. It's a regular DB2 program that's generated from metadata that is part of what we refer to as a mapping process. And the mapping process establishes the relationship between the IMS database structure and how it's implemented within DB2. So this is a regular DB2 program containing entirely static SQL. And when the SQL driver is generated, it's processed by the DB2 precompiler, as is any DB2 program, and creates a DBRM, which is bound into a DB2 package. DL2 doesn't force you to use any specific collection or plan. This allows you to integrate the DL2 environment into your current DB2 administration standards. One of the key benefits of this DL2 architecture is that you can migrate databases either individually or in related groups entirely of your choosing. Any application program that today is accessing more than one IMS database can access any combination of databases that are still in IMS or databases that have been migrated to DB2 with DL2. And another benefit of this architecture is that your overall migration process is a series of smaller, more manageable steps, phases, and that helps greatly to minimize the risks associated with other migration technologies that may require a big bang cut over where you change all your programs at the same time, you migrate all the databases at the same time, and over the weekend you switch in your entirety from IMS to DB2. DL2 enables you to do this in a much more manageable, phased, lower risk approach. Some clients, smaller clients, have migrated all databases at the same time. Most clients migrate them in related groups. As each IMS's database is converted into production, the associated IMS database datasets, secondary index datasets, and so on can be deleted. DL2 is intercepting all of the IMS calls. It's figuring out that the IMS call is for a database that's migrated to DL2, and it therefore processes the call in DB2. So DL2 is intercepting scheduling calls. So if you've migrated a database and deleted it, you can't start it to DB control, for example. That would otherwise cause a failure in your PSB scheduling. But because DL2 is intercepting PSB scheduling calls as well as IMS database calls, then DL2 is resetting the status of the database so that the application program is unaware of the fact that the data is actually in DB2 and the underlying IMS databases are no longer required. When you migrate all of your databases, you can eliminate IMS, and when Bill talked about eliminating IMS, the process and the steps that you perform are different for an IMS TM environment and a CICS environment. In a CICS environment, it's very, very easy. You've migrated all of your databases, all of your IMS databases to DB2. DL2 is intercepting all of the IMS calls in your program. You can delete all of your IMS databases, SDSS Reso, PocLib, SDSS Mac, Recons, Olds, all of these databases. I'm sure you get all of these data sets. I'm sure you get the picture. Your DVD, PSB, and ACB libraries and all of the associated management of those, again, no longer required. You can delete your DVD and PSBs and ACB libraries. In an IMS DBDC shop, it's a little bit different because IMS continues to use your ACBs, Recons, Olds datasets, and all these things. To eliminate IMS in an IMS DBDC environment, you reconfigure your IMS DBD system as an IMS DC control system. IMS DC control doesn't support IMS calls, IMS DB calls. But it doesn't have to because DL2 is intercepting them and processing them all in DB2. There are some minor changes to your application program maintenance process with DL2. I mentioned at the start that there's a batch utility that you run that initially relinks all of your application programs that have the stub statically linked to have the DL2 stub replace the statically linked IMS stub. Once you have converted to DB2 or DL2, and during your conversion process, you need to change your application program management procedures so that when you make a change to an application program for whatever reason, you have to compile and link edit it. The link edit process needs to resolve calls to IMS using the DL2 library. So existing clients have integrated DL2 with the likes of CE Endeavour and ChangeMan from Servina. So if we just look at that from just to step through those pictures again, so this is how we are today. We have an IMS program that has an IMS stub access and IMS databases. During the migration process, the DL2 stub now replaces the IMS stub, and it's making a runtime decision as to whether to process the call against the data in IMS because it hasn't been migrated, or it will process the call against the data in DB2 because it has been migrated. That entire decision-making and processing is transparent to your application program. Your application program's made an IMS call, and it gets the results of the IMS call and the PCB feedback. And your IMS program has no idea whether that came from IMS or it came from DB2 and DL2. And once you've migrated all of your databases, IMS is no longer part of your environment. All of your IMS calls are under the control of DL2. So what does DL2 support? Well, DL2, you can consider it to be a complete replacement for IMS DB. So online access from CICS and IMS DC programs is supported, and the various methods of IMS batch, BMP, DLI, and DBB, they're all supported. The call level interface, the command level interface, and AIB to DLI, all these APIs are supported. Programs can be written in COBOL, assembler, in fact, any LE language, they're all supported. And all of the IMS database calls and system calls, most of system calls rather, and the IMS command codes, they're all supported. So DL2 is a complete replacement for your IMS DB. It replaces all aspects of your current IMS DB processing today. Now the slide doesn't mention many of the different IMS full function database organizations, HDAM, HIDAM, PHDAM, and so on and so forth. DL2 supports all of the full function database organizations. It includes support for logical databases and logical relationships and secondary indexing, whether or not they're sparse. And DL2 also supports access to GSAM datasets, GSAM files. Although the data in a GSAM file itself is not migrated to DB2, because often GSAM files are accessed using standard BSAM or VSAM outside of IMS. After you've eliminated IMS, DL2 handles all of the GSAM requests in place of IMS. FastPath databases are not supported. Okay. So just to reiterate, DL2 supports all of the IMS database calls and virtually every command code with one exception, which is the Q command code, which in our experience, long experience, is very rarely used. And programs that use the Q command code have to have a special parameter in the application IMS PSB. So it's very easy to identify the potential use of the Q command code. Now, Bill will talk a little bit later about some of the services that we provide. One of those services is an analysis of your IMS PSBs and DVDs, and one of the objectives of that analysis is to establish whether there are aspects of your IMS environment that DL2 doesn't support, such as use of the Q command code or access to FastPath databases. There are a few very niche IMS IOPCB functions that are not explicitly supported by DL2, but there's an API within DL2 that enables you to code exits that are invoked for those IOPCB calls that aren't fully supported by DL2. And we've often helped clients in the past to write these exits in order that the equivalent of the IMS IOPCB call is performed within DL2. Okay, now Bill mentioned that one of the key considerations in a DL2 migration project is what do you want this data to look like in DB2? Well, there are some basic guidelines, probably not rules, but guidelines that surround your database, your DB2 database design. Typically, each IMS segment type maps to a single DB2 table, and the concatenated key of that segment type becomes the primary key in DB2. In order to ensure the hierarchic integrity of the data, DL2 relies on DB2 referential integrity. You decide what the table names are, you decide what the column names are, you decide what the column attributes are. You can optionally design your DB2 tables based on the definition of the record within the segment copybook. You can look to use built-in data transformation capabilities of DL2 in order to take data that's currently in IMS and transform it into a more useful form in DB2. For example, we come across many different representations of date fields within IMS databases. You have a DB2 date column. That's it. You have one way of defining date in DB2. and it's a DB2 date column. DL2 can take these various representations of date fields, whether they're packed decimal, zone decimal, whether they include the century or not. DL2 can take them and automatically transform them in order that they can be stored within DB2 in a date column type. When DB2 and DL2 retrieve data from DB2, the DB2 date column values are transformed back to the format that your application program expects to see according to how the field is defined within the segment copybooks. So if it's a packed decimal date field, DL2 may store it in DB2 as a DB2 date, and on retrieval will transform that date value back to its packed decimal format. I mentioned that the IMS concatenated key becomes part of the primary key. There are situations in which DL2 has to include a timestamp column in the absence of a natural key in the IMS database segment. When you don't have a key in your IMS segment or your key is not unique, you have to declare in the IMS DBD whether you want the duplicates to be inserted and retrieved using the insert rule of last or first or here. Those are also supported by DL2. The last and first rule are supported in DL2 using a timestamp, which orders the retrieval of data either ascending or descending, depending on whether the rule is last or first. The DB2 design to support a here segment is slightly different, with a couple of integer columns that in effect provide the equivalent as IMS pointers do today. After all the data is migrated to DB2, of course, the data is accessible through regular SQL. So if you're migrating your data in order to open it up to new development, often web-based development, then the data is in DB2, so you can write stored procedures or web services using Java or whatever to access the data that's in DB2. The DB2 design that you deploy is entirely based on what you want to do with the data once it's in DB2. Now, there's a lot of information on this slide, and I make no apologies for it, because it lets you see the various options that are available for deploying your data in DB2. I'll explain this slide quite simply. Starting at the bottom is the least complicated implementation and the least time to perform the migration, the least time for application testing. As you go through options 2, 3, and 4, the migration time increases, the complexity increases, and the necessity for application testing increases. So how would you decide which of those designs to employ? And when I say options in this slide, I'm not referring to runtime options or switches or anything like that. We use these terms options simply as a means to contrast the different choices that you have. If your objective is simply to use DL2 as a replacement for IMS, and you have no ongoing requirement to write SQL to access that data, perhaps you have your IMS DBAs have recently retired, you can't engage new people. There's not a big long line of people knocking on our door to become IMS DBAs these days. Well, if you're looking to use DL2 simply as a replacement for IMS DB, then an option 1 design is very simple, very straightforward. The migration process is easy, and the whole project, the project time is reduced as a result. If, however, you're looking to deploy DL2 in order to open up the data to new uses through native SQL, stored procedures, web services, and so on and so forth, then you're going to deploy a DB2 design in which each field in the segment is exposed as a DB2 column in its own right. One of the issues that opens up is an issue of data consistency. IMS doesn't police any data value rules in any field. As far as IMS is concerned, data is bits and bytes. Whereas, as we know, DB2 is much fussier about what you can store in DB2 when you have a DB2 column type that's not character. So if you're choosing to deploy a DB2 design option for DL2, which has DB2 date fields and integer, big integer, small integer, decimal, whatever, then that places some dependency on the validity and the consistency of your data in IMS. DL2 provides a wealth of tools to help you assess the data, help you to identify every bad field, bad in the sense of its value is not consistent with the target DB2 column value. You use these tools during your initial data migration process to assess the scope of data cleansing that you have to perform. Data cleansing can take many forms. Data cleansing could be you write some programs to fix the data in IMS, or data cleansing can use built-in APIs within DL2 that do data verification and can set the DB2 column value null indicator on if you've got spaces in a packed decimal field, for example, and you want to return that to your application program as spaces, then maybe you make it null. And through very simple exits, you can transform, you can fix bad data on the fly so that you make it valid for DB2. And when you retrieve the data from DB2, these exits transform the data back into the format and value that your application program expects to get today. So option 2, 3, and 4 deploy the segment copybook. Option 2 is a halfway house insofar as the DB2 columns are character in each case. Now that diminishes the value of the data in DB2, but what it does do is it enables you to do some analysis of your data in DB2. Rather than trying to analyze the consistency of your data in IMS, an option 2 design enables you to analyze the data and correct inconsistent data using standard DB2 tools. And once you've completed that data analysis, you can go through a remigration process for an individual segment or for all the segments in the database so that you deploy an option 3 design, and an option 3 design takes the fields in the segment copybook and the field attributes in the segment copybook to determine the DB2 design. And the DB2 design will include decimal columns, so you can store packed decimal or zone decimal in a decimal or an integer or a small integer or a big integer in DB2. It can take numeric dates and store them in date columns. It can take numeric times and store them as time columns. Option 4 takes it a stage further where in effect it enables you to take an IMS segment and perhaps migrate it to multiple DB2 tables. Let's say you have multiple record types. You can, for example, take multiple record types and separate those into multiple tables. But the overhead, the CPU cost, increases as you go through these various options because you're asking DB2 to do more. Okay, so a typical migration project is split into 3 phases. You have this initial phase of mapping and migration where you establish a relationship between your IMS databases and the implementation in DB2. Application testing is the next phase, and it's no coincidence that it's the biggest box on the screen. It's the longest part of any application, any migration project, although the application testing time is a whole lot less than if you were to rewrite this application yourself. Once you've completed application testing, you move the databases into production. And if you kind of mentioned earlier that you can either do all your databases in one hit or you can do them in groups. Typically clients do them in groups and these groups overlap. DL Circle and SyncSort normally undertake the mapping and migration process on a services database. That means that delivered to you is the DB2 DDL subject to your standards and your design requirements, and all of the metadata is provided to you and you focus on application testing because you know the applications. Once the last database is in production, of course, you're in a position now to eliminate your IMS license, as I explained a little bit earlier. So why the transparency approach? Well, as Bill said, we will repeat the fact that there are no application program changes required. We've even worked with clients who've lost the source to their application programs. That may be a problem for them, but it's not a problem from a DL2 perspective. Very low risk because you can migrate on a database by database basis instead of having to do a big bang approach. You have the potential for savings through elimination of the cost of your IMS DB license and associated tools at the end of the project. You converge your databases, so instead of having DB2 and IMS, you now just have DB2 and only one set of DBA support is required. And you can deploy different DB2 designs based on your requirements to access that data post-migration. And at any stage in the life of that application, you can deploy a different design should a new requirement arise that could be satisfied by deploying a different DB2 design. There are some minor changes required to enable DL2, but all of these changes can be made in advance before you migrate your first database, such that when you get to the point of migrating the databases, your environments are ready for DL2. Thank you for your time. Sorry that was brief and rapid, but I'd now like to hand back to Bill. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Okay. So what we're now going to do now is to just walk through some basically case studies of some of the clients that have utilised DL2 to great effect. The first two we're going to talk about are clients that basically are have migrated just to eliminate costs. So the first one is Independence Blue Cross in Philadelphia. They migrated two critical business applications, which consisted of about 209 IMS databases. We completed the project within 8 months. We used an option 2 design, as you saw from the chart that Stan was showing, following a proof of concept stage that we did. One of their issues was that they had limited IMS support staff and resources, so needed quite a lot of hand-holding to sort of walk through and get this done. But at the end of it, they had some very significant ongoing annual cost savings from the elimination of IMS DB and IMS. And a very, very happy customer. In fact, I spoke with the director there about 4 or 5 weeks ago to let him know about the SyncSort acquisition. He told me it was one of his top 3 projects in his career of working. So it was a very nice note from a customer on the effectiveness of DL2. So that's Independence Blue Cross. Next one is US Gypsum, which is USG in Chicago. They're a large provider of building supplies, very old company, very established. They had a very complex suite of IMS databases, about 85 in total, probably some of the most complicated databases that we'd come across. Again, limited in-house knowledge and support, and again, they'd suffered with the drain of resources going off to retirement. They were looking to eliminate to reduce cost. We're able to actually get rid of the IMS DB license and the tools costs once they'd completed the migration. They did a single production cutover. And again, we talk about testing. It really comes down to the complexity and the nature of your application databases as to how much testing you need to undertake. They took a view that they would actually do about 15 to 20% testing, and then they would fix issues on the fly in what they called their war room. And in fact, Stan, one of our other technical folks, spent a couple of weekends working with the client to actually get through that, and very successful again. And that was an option 3 design so that they could continue basically maintaining those applications post-migration. Okay, the next two were purely migration for business needs. So the first one is the State of Tennessee Department of Motor Vehicles. They contacted us after 2 failed multi-million-dollar projects to rewrite their applications, and this was for the title and registration system at the state of Tennessee. They wanted to maintain the original system, but also wanted to enhance and modernize that application. So what they did was they rewrote a web front end which they delivered out to all of the DMV offices across the state of Tennessee. Basically what they got was effectively a front-end new system, but with the original back end. Again, very successful project. The state's been using DL2 for coming up for 7 years now. Again, very, very happy customer. Another client actually in Europe is KBC Bank. They utilize DL2 as sort of an opportunity to finish off the elimination of IMS DB. They'd already done some rewriting of some of their legacy legacy applications, but then utilized DL2 to complete the process of getting everything to DB2, and then we're able to eliminate IMS DB. They're in an IMS DB DC environment, and I think as Stan explained, we can operate both in a CICS environment and a IMS DC environment very happily. So they basically eliminated IMS DB but continued to run IMS DC. It was a very fast project and basically delivered very, very fast ROI. I think that project probably took less than 2 months to complete, so it was a very successful project. Okay, the last two really were a combination of business need and cost reduction. You probably noted in a couple of those previous examples there was, some capability for cost reduction and business need, but certainly in the case of Foot Locker here, this was an organisation with 4 core application databases that were running the entire business. There was 82 other databases that we did as an option 1 design, but for the core applications we did an option 3 design, so they had a full DB2 design. This was the client with the initial study that said 68 man-years to rewrite the applications, so as you can imagine that was a bit of a non-starter. So we provided them with the ability to get to a good DB2 model so they could continue actually furthering those applications, but also provided them with the cost elimination of getting rid of IMS DB and their IMS tools. And then the last one is the state of Florida. That's a recently completed project for the Department of Corrections. They had a very high cost for IMS, so one of the main drivers was the elimination of IMS DB. But again, we opted for an option 3 migration so they could continue maintaining those applications. That required a significant amount of data cleansing, so about 1,200 numeric fields, including some interesting dates, as Stan put. As you can imagine, in the Department of Corrections, dates are rather crucial. They also had some very, very large databases in excess of 25 gigabytes, so a big environment, complex environment, but again a very, very successful project. And in fact they actually undertook a reference call for us just last week for another state entity. Very happy people. Okay, so what can we provide to assist you to make some decisions about whether DL2 is right for you? Stan mentioned the free PSB and DBD analysis service that we like to provide. That allows us to very quickly identify if there's anything in your IMS environment that we've not seen before. That's very rare. But it also allows us to very quickly quantify what a project would look like in terms of the length of time that it would take to undertake the project, how complex it would be. And then the next step typically is with a client is a proof of concept, where we take maybe a database or some sample databases. We actually map and migrate those for you. We provide the software on site, and then we basically come on site to help you with some skills transfer and get you into a situation where those databases are actually in DB2 in your environment, and you have the opportunity to test and make sure that you're happy that DL2 actually does what it says on the can. During a project, we provide most of the mapping and migration services, and then we're typically on site to support a production cutover as well. But again, it's a tried and tested methodology. We've done it with many, many clients, and as I said, we have many, many clients who are more than happy to tell you about their experiences. So as we proceed, if this is of interest, clearly we'll put that option out to you to talk to customers. Okay, so again, so next steps. This was clearly an overview to give you an understanding of what DL2 could provide, but to understand your own unique environment, typically what we'll set up as a technical overview session via a conference call where we can really get into the detail of your unique environment, answer the questions that are specific to you, which we'd love to do. Again, the PSB and DVD review service, and then again, talk to customers from a potential reference. If you have further questions or you want to reach out to myself or Stan, our telephone numbers are on the slide below. And you can also mail in questions to migration@circle-group.com with any questions that you might have. I think I'm going to hand back over to Jennifer now. Jennifer, I believe you're going to handle any questions that might have been posed while we've going through the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Bill and Stan. That's lots of great content. I know we're close to the top of the hour, but for those of you who can stay with us a few more minutes, we will now begin to answer some of the questions we have received throughout the presentations. As a reminder, if you have a question, please submit it in the Ask a Question box, and we will do our best to get to all the questions before we end at the top or near the top of the hour. For those questions we do not get to answer on the line, we will follow up with the answers via the email address you used for registration for the webcast. So, Stan, I believe I'll turn it over to you, and you can review and answer some of the questions we've got from the audience.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. Folks, I'm going to rattle through the questions quite quickly and combine some questions because of the same. But as Bill says, you can always follow up with us at any time later if you want a more detailed answer. Okay, first question, always the first question. Performance at CPU. DB2 uses more CPU than IMS, and that's a fact. The DL2 overhead is as small as we can make it. So there is an overhead, so you don't deploy DL2 to reduce your CPU usage. Bill made reference to one of the clients in Belgium, KBC. They recently answered a question on the IMS list news group about DL2 and overhead. They observed about a 15% CPU overhead in their online workload. Batch workload is much more difficult to predict and much more variable because it depends on lots of factors such as call patterns, such as the DB2 design you deploy, and many of those sorts of aspects. So I just reiterate, this isn't going to save you CPU, but then UBS, one of our clients, is the third largest Forex dealer in the world, issuing many, many, many millions of transactions every day. If DL2 presented a significant overhead, then they wouldn't be a DL2 client. But we always encourage clients to try before you buy, doing a proof of concept POC, and one of the fundamental objectives in that POC is to enable you to measure DL2 with your data in your environment, in your database, with your application programs. Those are the only measurements that are going to be of value to you. Measurements taken by other clients are interesting for them, but you need to measure it your environment, and you'll get the cost to you. Another question about how do you handle complex logically related databases? I would say with great care, because logically related databases can be very complex. Some of the most complex we've dealt with were, funnily enough, at Levi Strauss. And I used to think that when you bought a pair of jeans, the only choice you had was denim, button fly or zip fly. But these were very complicated logical related databases for their finance systems. Yes, very difficult, bidirectional, physical, virtual, so on and so forth. The rules, the update rules can be very complicated. Needless to say, we've been able to support all of the logically related databases that we've encountered so far, some of which have been particularly difficult, even to the extent that we pointed out to IBM that the logical relationship update rules that was published in the Database Administration Guide appendices were wrong in IMS version 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so there's another question about generic segments with multiple record types. I made reference to these briefly when I discussed the various DB2 design options that you deploy. There is a possibility to separate a single IMS segment into multiple DB2 tables, but that adds to the overhead because you've got additional SQL calls. However, if it's essential that you separate these segments out into multiple tables, then yes, you can do that within IMS, within DL2. A related question says, can you combine segments? Not very easily. If you imagine an IMS insert call, that's an IMS insert call for a single segment, or a replace call for a single segment. I haven't really thought about combining segments. I would imagine that that would be difficult, but then because of the APIs that enable you to code your own exits within DL2, I wouldn't ever say that anything was impossible. Just some things will be very, very difficult. A question after the migration from IMS to DB2, how long does it take to have the same stability to be had with IMS? We would not expect anybody to migrate into production unless they'd tested and all of their online programs, batch programs, produce exactly the same results with DL2. So when you go into production, the DL2 environment is as stable as the IMS environment. A question about application team wants to make a change in the IMS program. How do they do that if they get rid of their IMS people? Or is it just the IMS systems programmers that can go away? I'm not going to comment on who goes after a DL2 migration project. However, if you deploy a very simplified DB2 design, option 1 that we've referred to, then you typically continue to maintain those application programs as IMS programs. And by the way, if you're using the likes of FileAid or File Manager today in IMS, well, as you would expect, FileAid, File Manager and these tools also will work with DL2. So with DL2 and an option 1 design, you would do the same application program change and management as you do today with IMS. If, however, you deploy a DB2 design that's better suited for native SQL, then you wouldn't necessarily change an IMS call, but what you may well consider is adding a SQL call to your existing IMS program. That's about a summation of all of the questions. If I haven't answered your specific question, I apologize, but by all means, please follow up with us, and I'll answer anything once the call's finished. Thank you for your time. Sorry for the hurried nature of it, but I spoke too long earlier. I'll return you to Jennifer now, but thank you.
Thanks, Dan. And again, for any questions that we did not get to answer live on the air, we do have your email addresses, so we will be following up with you individually. So we are over the hour. I'd like to thank all of you for coming, and especially for those of you who stayed with us a bit longer. As a reminder, you can download today's slides from the Event Resources tab on the player, and everyone who registered for the webcast will receive a link to the recording when it becomes available. And we encourage you to share the slides and the presentations with any of your colleagues who may find it useful. So thanks again, and have a great day.